Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
A Tidbit Pod Smash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
We're your hosts, Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right.
You had no take. You had no.
I did
sound.
take.
It didn't come through.
You didn't hear
That's
that?
why it's awkward pause. Yeah, I didn't hear anything from you. I was
Okay.
like, uh-oh.
Well, weird.
Okay. Yeah. Sweet.
All right. Well, tonight we
Cool.
are talking about morally gray video game developers.
Yeah.
This could be individuals. It could be companies. It could be organizations. But we're talking about the people who make the games, many of which you love or may love, but they may be also doing shady things, and like how to react. It's kind of been something we've been like talking about and discussing for a long time in relation to specific incidences. But we're going to talk a little bit more broadly tonight. But we're also going to narrow in on a couple of specific people or companies. But it's a kind of a timely thing because more and more, as we're having this sort of like reckoning in the video game industry, more and more people are coming forward to talk about the just objectively morally bad behavior. I suppose not objectively, but the morally bad behavior of people in the video game industry. And it's a good time. It's a good thing. I'm glad that people are now both empowered and able to speak out against it. But it can be tough when you are considering the fact that these people have been and continue to make games you love. And it can be challenging to navigate that in your own mind. Or maybe it's not. Maybe you just don't care. That's fine. We hope you still stick around and listen to this episode because you might, learn a thing or two or hear a different perspective. So either way, should be good. We'll get to all that and we'll dig into it more. But first, we are Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer, and you might need one for this episode. So what are you drinking tonight?
I actually have another bourbon, but I brought this on the show because it's beer adjacent, kind of.
Okay.
Adjacent to
I know what
beer
that means.
is cider.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This is Bold Rock Straight Bourbon. And you might think, well, Bold Rock makes cider, and you are correct. In 2022, this year, they have unveiled and released their spirits. And one of them is a straight bourbon. And on the bottle, it says, "The beautiful color and bold aroma are all thanks to patience. We waited over 2 years until it was perfectly aged and then decided to share it. Smooth caramel and oak, vanilla and leather, our Bold Rock Straight Bourbon Whiskey is excellent on its own or in your favorite cocktail. Enjoy." Now, if you're a bourbon aficionado, you'll catch that they only aged their bourbon for 2 years. That makes a very rough bourbon. Better quality bourbons are aged way longer than that. But given real estate and time investment, etc., you need to start selling your product sooner rather than later. I understand why they would do it for 2 years. So that said, the taste notes of this are that caramel, vanilla, leather, etc. But there's no denying the apple somewhere in here. Like, there's nothing on the bottle that says apple. But if they use any of the same facilities, the same barrels, if there's any cross-contamination in the yeast or anything going on from their cidery practices, like, it is in this bourbon, and it is wonderful. So it is a little rough
Nice.
around the edges, as I said, because it's not aged as long as better quality ones. But you get that little bit of an apple. And they actually do have an apple whiskey that they're sold out of. And I was very bummed because I really wanted that. So this bourbon is good. And I think it was under $40, which is like not bottom shelf, but not top tier either. It's like right in the middle. Totally fair for what I'm drinking. And I happen to live close enough to the Bold Rock Cidery that they sell it on site. So I don't know if it's distributed through our ABC. Virginia has ABC stores. The state controls the distribution of liquor. So they allow the distillery / cidery to sell it on site. And it is awesome. So I highly recommend it if you can find it. It's great.
Awesome. That does sound delicious. I want to try it. I want some.
Come see me. It's easy.
I am drinking a Cayman Jack margarita. It's a margarita in a bottle. And I got it a couple months ago back. I think all the way before Christmas, back when I did like a Food Lion run for some stuff. And I've been able to like supplement since then with my ski trip and stuff like that. So it's been sitting there waiting for an opportunity for me to drink it. And I just finally got back around to it. And it's perfect too, because even though I bought it in the dead middle of the winter thinking, well, I'm gonna have to drink this out of season, by the time you're listening to this, it's gonna be like April or just the end of March, and we got a nice early spring going on. It was like 60 degrees. I took my daughter outside with my son and just let her soak up some sun rays, and she was having a
Yay.
blast. She was
Good.
she was like, she was not fussing or anything. She was just taking it all in and excited to be outside. And I was like, it's warm enough out here that I'm comfortable with that right now. So yeah, drinking a margarita feels like a perfect day to kind of welcome in spring with a nice margarita. It is everything you want out of a margarita. It's actually surprisingly good for like a bottle. I prefer my margarita mixed by the hands of someone who I, can trust.
You mean like me, who like squeezes limes for eternity and makes my own simple syrup from scratch and like
exactly. Yeah. So this is not as good as that, but this is a pretty good margarita for like, hey, I'm snagging something at Food Lion.
What's it called again?
Revisit it. Cayman Jack margarita.
I don't know if you know this about me or not, but I Google every time you mention whatever, because we're not in person. I can't see the thing anymore. Right. I started this like maybe 2 years ago, right? The pandemic has now affected us for 2 years. So 2 years ago, when we were stopped being in person, I started Googling everything you've talked about, and I try to like visualize it. And like I see it in stores, I'm like, oh yeah, you've had that, and like yeah. So sorry, that's why I asked what it was again. So I can Google it.
Yeah, Cayman Jack.
Yeah,
that's good. It's margarita. It's sugary and limey
fancy
and delicious. Not bad.
It kind of
it's
I like
tiny
this
bottle. Little tiny bottle.
It's not the can with the cheesy thing.
No, it's nice.
They have a Moscow Mule and they have a mojito as well.
I think I've had their Moscow Mule. I prefer the margarita so far. So
okay, yeah, mojito. I like this. I would
love
drink
me
that.
A good mojito.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Word. All right. Well, we don't have a ton of time to banter, but is there anything you wanted to chat about before you're closing in on that Elden Ring platinum?
Yeah.
What?
Yep. I'm actually going to platinum a From Software game, which I didn't expect. What? Leading into the Elden Ring adventure, I was not even trying to put that on my radar because I thought it was going to be extraordinarily difficult. But it's continuing to prove not, except for the ridiculous 7 hours that I spent trying to fight one boss, which
that one
completely like gave me the From Software experience. The frustration, the rage, the disconnection, the shutdown. I went through all.
There's always one. I'm telling you, man. That's what I'm saying. There's always one,
and that's annoying and not fun. And I do not enjoy any of that.
There was like 3 of them in Bloodborne, but they're all DLC bosses. So,
ugh, I don't ever want to do that again.
The one in Dark Souls 3 is also a DLC boss. Actually, come to think of it, I think. But
if any of our audience members are playing Elden Ring, this boss is Millennia.
I was gonna say you probably shouldn't necessarily spoil it.
Why not? Really it's a name. You know nothing. There's no context. The boss's name is Millennia.
No, they mentioned Millennia. If people are paying attention to the story, they'll know.
Oh yeah.
I guess, but they know they have to fight her anyways because she's one of the shard bearers with the great runes or whatever. But yeah. All of the rest of them were ponces. She is not a ponce. Oof. So buckle down. No. Look up strategies ahead of time, folks, because unless you like to go in and raw dog it, she's gonna make you feel raw. I'll put it that way. Honestly, actually, and I don't know if I got lucky or what. I think I got her in 2 or 3 attempts, and I didn't have to do any other strategy other than pretty much what I've been doing for every boss so far. Again, I don't know if I just got lucky. I guess I didn't even really notice she was healing when she was hitting her, like when she was hitting my spirit. I didn't notice she was healing. I didn't know that was a mechanic of hers until people were complaining about it later. And I was like, oh, I guess I just DPS'd her through the heal. So
yeah,
I'm not saying I'm great or good. I'm just saying I did it. And
lucky.
And I saw how hard it was for you to do it. And I tried helping you, and honestly probably hindered your progress more than helped it at the time. But we talked strategies. We looked stuff up, and you say you hated it, but I'm glad you had it happen because you got to realize that not every boss is like that. In fact, you got to realize that you got through like 90% of the game with no problems and ran into the one boss that gave you problems. That happens in all of the games. There's always one. There's always 1 or 2.
Ugh.
And you reacted exactly how you're supposed to, which is persistence.
I don't ever want to do this again.
Research and
well, the only reason there was persistence in research is because you told me it was the one boss and I had a platinum on the other end of it.
Once you found the right strategy and dealt with her crap, you beat it. I think it's fair for them to throw one fight in there that you can't just cheese with your cheese spells and have to learn it a little bit. And instead, guess what? You got to find a whole different cheese, and you got to use the Frostomp cheese, and that is just as cheesy, but it's a different kind of cheese that you had to look up and learn. And I think that is fair. That, in my mind, is the quintessential From Software experience: is running, not necessarily throwing your head over and over again and hope you get lucky. It is learning how to deal with the crap that's being thrown at you and adjust your strategy accordingly with minimal effort. And you did that, and it was wonderful. And when you finally did that, instead of throwing it over and over again, then I'm proud of you. Whatever.
Well,
It's
I'm glad.
fine.
Thank you for the encouragement again.
You did it. And you're going to get a From Software Platinum, and you're hooked. And now you're hooked.
No, that turned me off a lot. That really, really put a wet blanket. I was excited about From Software. I was looking at Sekiro, at Dark Souls Remastered as I was playing through Elden Ring. I'm like, yes, this is going to be awesome. I have all these new worlds to explore and like games to discover. And then that fight happened, and suddenly I kind of want to not ever start Sekiro or Dark Souls Remastered.
But you know how to do it now. You know what to do to research. You research it. You watch videos, and you figure out which strategy works best for you. That's how I got through Sekiro. There's some fights that I looked at, and I was like, there's absolutely no way. And I found out a strategy that worked for me and my skill set. And I said, oh, okay, I think I can do that. I practiced that. I made headway. I still died. I practiced it, kept practicing it, and would get it down eventually. And that's in my mind, that's what you do. And that's what you did. So you can do it.
Yeah. Of course,
but if you don't enjoy it, you don't enjoy it, right? Like, yeah, that's it. If you don't enjoy it, you don't enjoy it. So at least you can now speak from experience. That's the difference. Is back before you said they're so hard or blah, 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 blah. And you imagine an experience that didn't exist. No, you are proven right in 5% of the entire gameplay. You are proven
less than that. Dude, this is like 1% of Elden Ring. This is like one. It's an optional boss. You don't even have to fight
exactly. Unless you're doing the platinum, it's an optional boss. So for people out there listening, being like, "Oh gosh, like I'll have to get through that boss. I don't want to do that." No, you don't. If you just want to play the game, you don't have to. You can skip her entirely and still get the more or less full Elden Ring experience.
Then you have to deal with Malekith, whatever the crap.
And he's not bad. He's easy. Yeah, I don't know. So that's it. That's all I'm saying is that don't be turned off by Termite being a wet blanket about one fight, 1% of 0.5% of the entire content of a game.
Yeah, we'll keep going
exactly.
Lower. Yeah.
So just because he's trophy obsessed, and he's obsessed with the game enough to get a trophy. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, the game completely hooked me. I was very, very addicted. Very.
Exactly. You'll get that feeling from Bloodborne. You'll get that feeling from possibly Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 1, I think you'll appreciate ultimately for its legacy, but it's also a little dated. So, in not a bad way. The chances of me
getting to those games is exponentially lower than it used to be.
Sekiro is a coin cost for me, though. Sekiro, I have no idea. You'll either love it or you'll hate it.
Yeah,
and I still believe that even before your experience with Millennia, because it doesn't have the same amount of safety nets. So
yeah, we'll see.
When you bought Sekiro, I was like, maybe not the one to buy, but you'll love Bloodborne. I think you'll like Bloodborne a lot. Just throwing that one out.
All right. Yeah. I mean, Sekiro is appealing to me in its setting and its style and the things I've seen and heard about it. Like everything sounds like more appealing to me than anything in the Dark Souls world. And I have the same information. I know what those games are. I've seen gameplay. I've heard the reviews. Like for some reason, Sekiro stands out to me in my tastes more as far as like what I think I'm getting into. We'll see.
Sure.
I don't know.
We have to talk about favorite things. So.
We have to. We've got things lined up. We've missed favorite things a few times. Doing this podcast is our favorite thing.
Depending on how sick people are of Elden Ring, I might cut a lot of that or all of it. And so we did a nice transition that enables me to do that. I'll start. My favorite thing is I finally grabbed a couple more Ethernet cords for my house. And the downside is I didn't get long enough ones for the two that I snagged a couple from some equipment that we were decomming from work. And I'll have to return the 25s and see if I can grab some 50s because 35 or 40 will get me just fine. I'm just barely not long enough for 25s. But anyways, that did get me around to at least taking the 50 footer that I had and running it. I basically did everything but run the new cables to my office. And what I wanted to do is make sure the hole coming out of my bedroom was wide enough to fit 3 cables, mostly get the heads through, right? Because that's the thickest part.
Yep.
So I could run 2 to my bedroom in order to hook 1 up to my PS4 and 1 up to my laptop where the 50 footer previously was. So those, unfortunately, are not going to be finished until I get back over there this week. But the 50-footer I moved to my PlayStation 5 and in the living room, and Lord Almighty, the difference is staggering.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah.
Even with just, so number one, I ran speed tests. My upload speed actually surprisingly sits solidly at the 10 megabytes per second that Comcast recently updated me to.
Yeah.
But the download speed was almost 20 megabytes per second faster than on the Wi-Fi. And this was all in an effort. I sold my wife on this entire project by basically being like, look, every time someone runs, so like we have guests over here, they hop on our Wi-Fi and it like cruises our bandwidth. If I can take like 3 devices off of that entirely, that will make up the difference, right?
Yeah.
So I am so I've got the cord running, and I know it was better because I had just previously that day I had just been streaming my PS5 remote play, and I was wondering, I was like, man, this doesn't seem that much better. I just hooked up the Ethernet. What's going on? I looked at the network. It was still set to like prefer my Wi-Fi. I was like, oh, okay. So I like removed the Wi-Fi, like formally set up the wired LAN connection, and then literally the difference is staggering. I went from like consistently experiencing lag and pixelation and all that to suddenly like, oh my gosh, this is almost like playing like live in my living room.
Yep.
It was that seamless. And I imagine it's only going to get better when I can finally get a wired connection to my PS4 as well. So that was my favorite thing, is like taking the time and effort to actually run some Ethernet cords. I have to do it through my crawl space because otherwise my house is not laid out in such a way where it's easy for me to just like slap it in there. But with that little bit of effort running through the crawl space, taking that time, it's awesome. I'm into it. So that's my favorite thing.
It is a great thing. I used to do that at my old house. I would run a wire from the router because I had Verizon, and Verizon's stock router, the one you didn't have to pay extra for, was awful. And the Wi-Fi speeds were super slow. And to get anywhere near what I was paying for in speeds, I had to have a hard wire in. That situation is not the same here. I now have a Google Nest Wi-Fi, like mesh router situation. And while wired is still infinitely faster, the wireless is good enough for remote play so that I have a consistent 1080p stream, which is nice. My PC that I'm recording on right now is hardwired for that very reason. Like you just said, I have a 100-foot cable that is running across my basement so that I can do live streams without interruption. However, my favorite thing, the reason why I had to have favorite things, a neighbor here, his name is Michael. We had a discussion on someone's porch somewhere out here about Zelda. He turns out he's a pretty good gamer nerd, kind of in our audience spectrum, loves games, plays games, knows them. We were talking about Zelda being my favorite franchise of all time, and collecting old retro games because he's into Pokemon. And so I was talking about Pokemon collecting, and then we talked about Zelda collecting. And I happened to mention that I am trying to collect every single Zelda game released on the original hardware, except for the CDI ones. They don't count. So and yes, that means I have 3 copies of Twilight Princess because it came out on the Wii, the GameCube, and the Wii U through the HD remaster. Yes, it means I have 2 copies of Breath of the Wild on the Wii U and the Switch. But I was missing one port, and that was the port of Zelda 2 from the NES onto the Game Boy Advance. And he's like, I think I have that, and it's collecting dust. So if you want it, you can have it. And I was like, no way, dude. This is amazing. It's not ridiculously expensive, but it's definitely not like you just give this away. It's probably worth $30 to $50 without a box or a manual. And sure enough, the next day he brings it over to my house. And now I posted this on our social media feeds, like probably a month ago from the time the audience hears this. So you can go back and see the picture of every single piece of Zelda games, all of the games released, and that's Link's Awakening on Game Boy, with Link's Awakening on Game Boy Color and its remake on the Switch, Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, all the DS games, 3DS games, all the consoles, every single version of Zelda. Yes, the multiple releases too in North America. I have them, and it is wonderful. Thanks to a friend of the show, Justin, I have all of the Zelda amiibo. So I am just like over the moon excited about Zelda, and I have all of the things in my collection that you can get. I mean, like, there's nothing left unless I want to start getting a CDI and like get those games, which don't count. So that's my favorite thing. And I had a fun family weekend getaway to Bold Rock where I bought this bourbon, and I won't go into too much detail other than going to the cidery itself is awesome. It's a wonderful environment, and it's super exciting. And anyone who comes to visit me, I'm going to be like, let's go to Bold Rock. Let's go to Bold Rock, even though I'm not into cider. And that's it. That's my favorite things.
Whoop, whoop. All right, cool. Well, that leads us to our final segment, which is DLC. DLC stands for downloadable content. It is a fun little mini discussion, a little gimmicky discussion that we have that may or may not be related to our main topic. This one is kind of meant to be a counterpoint to our main topic. It's meant to talk about people that we like and are proud of and think are doing good work, and so far have not proven to be absolute abject monsters. And so that's going to be our prompt real quick is I'll say our DLC question for the day is, who is someone in the video game industry that you hope never turns out to be a terrible person? That you're like, please, 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 no controversies, nothing, no skeletons in your closet, just like keep making good games and being a good person. Who is that? Who's the one like pure one in the industry?
I have like 3 or 4. That's crazy to narrow this down.
I just found out. I'm super disappointed. I just found out today that there are some like people have dug up from like I guess it's like a Glassdoor kind of website. I don't think it was Glassdoor specifically, but it's like a Glassdoor website and maybe a Japanese version of it. Apparently, there's lots and lots of scathing entries on From Software from former employees about what conditions there, low pay and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, come on, Miyazaki, no.
I know Bandai Namco just gave like a bunch of raises and bonuses to everyone because of the success of Elden Ring, but that's not From Software. Awesome. That's Bandai
but that's
Namco.
Not exactly. Well, and so they probably got a cut of that, and that's great and everything. But like, but if there's still even if that's a one incident thing, if there's still sort of a history of low pay and poor job stuff. Like, again, that's one website, and those are disgruntled. Who knows? Disgruntled employees. Who knows the real context there? But it's enough of a mar for me to say, like, oh, I can see it though. You know, Miyazaki's like a genius, and he's a good designer, and sometimes people like that are narrow-minded when it comes to the business side of their business, or he may not even run the business side. He may have no say in the business side of the business. Yeah. So, still a little disappointing to find out. So I'm also kind of hesitant to say people sometimes with this answer because I'm like, but what if they already have and I just don't know? And someone's going to go on there and be like, that's actually, Miyamoto was, doing this stuff on the side. And it's like, no.
I think Miyamoto's pretty safe. He was one of my picks.
I think so. He's pretty pure. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have my ear to the ground with this a lot. I pretty much live and breathe this stuff. So if there was wind of somebody doing bad things, we would have heard about it, unless between the time we talk and this episode goes live, there's something. Other than that, I think I'm pretty confident. I'm going to go with the most relevant one that's out there. I mean, Miyamoto was one of my 4 picks, but the most relevant one that's out there now is Phil Spencer. I really, really hope that what he says and what he
I don't think
he is the most like, he holds the most integrity from his history at Xbox and what he's done since Microsoft has brought him onto the Microsoft CEO now, or the Xbox CEO now. He has turned that entire company around to make it more diverse and more inclusive, to make it more transparent, to stand up initiatives like the entire accessibility. It started with a controller, but then they became an entire wing that anyone can submit their game to authorize and like validate their game is to like meet all the accessibility metrics for. So he's standing up like all this stuff, setting new standards for inclusivity, accessibility in the industry. He's doing all these wonderful things. If anything comes out about him, I will be like, no one's immune. Because like, while Miyamoto may have like been in the shadows quietly like churning out Mario and Zelda and Star Fox and like among other things, and he's not doing anything active in the industry to make the industry a better place for anyone. He's just making really good stuff and not doing problematic things, which is fine. But Phil Spencer is like out front making like discussions and having interviews. He showed up on like Gary Whitta's Animal Talking the week after Halo Infinite was delayed away from its launch of the Series X window, which is a major, huge chink to a company. And the CEO would never come out and talk about it like casually, candidly on some talk show in Animal Crossing on a Nintendo game. Like, what Phil Spencer does is just next level, and he breaks all of the standard, like what CEOs are expected to do in the business area. And I want to just like, he just won an award for like I feel embarrassed. I don't even know, but he received like,
he won the lifetime achievement at the DICE
Awards. And he totally earned it. Like, he so earned everything about it at DICE. That's what it was. The lifetime achievement at DICE. Thank you. And so I really hope that nothing comes out about him. So he is solid. He's done everything correctly, and everything that's out there about him.
You never meet your heroes in this regard, because he's, I don't know. I think I have no evidence for anything. I cannot back I wouldn't, and I can't back anything up, so I'm not going to necessarily speculate on anything that I suspect. But all I'll say is, in a company like Microsoft, you don't get as far as Phil Spencer has gotten without some skeletons, is all I'm saying. Maybe they're not that bad, but the guy's got skeletons. I just can sense it.
Yeah.
And he does a really, really, really good job of PR. And that is great. That's a skill. That's a useful thing. But I just, Microsoft itself is a company that is laden with abuses and terrible practices. And so getting far in a company like that means,
Phil Spencer has acknowledged that, by the way. He's actually mentioned it and said it's like a stain on Microsoft's history, and he regrets that happened. It wasn't under his watch. It was like, Microsoft's reputation prior to Phil Spencer having any influence on that at all.
Right. Microsoft's been around for half a century at this point. So
right. So at least like he's not trying to hide it. Phil Spencer is out front about it. He's like, this is what happened at Xbox. Like, this is terrible, and I never want to see this happen again. And
I'm not talking about Xbox. I'm talking about Microsoft, the entire company,
which Phil doesn't have control over that.
Of course. Yeah. I'm not saying that he does. I'm not saying he's responsible. I'm saying, in order to get as far as he's gotten in Microsoft, he has to have had some skeletons. And that is maybe an unfair statement. So I may be unfairly judging both him and Microsoft as a result of that. We'll have some disclaimers, but I get a sense, man. I just get a sense. Yeah. He works very hard to maintain a very specific image. And I do not believe the man behind that. I don't believe the man's wearing a mask. And I don't believe the man behind the mask is fully as integral. But that's fine. He has done nothing. He has no current black marks to his record. I looked it up, and the internet has nothing bad to say about him, which makes me even more suspicious.
No, the internet can't. You can't outrun the internet.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, I never meet your heroes is all I'm going to say there.
All right.
Everybody does
my actual
things,
video game industry hero, like my real one, like for real, like true to my heart, is Satoru Iwata. Rest in peace. That man, he is just amazing. And I'm not going to go into details here. If you're an audience member listening to this show, please go check out Iwata Says and do tons of research on what Iwata has done in the industry. Or at least for Nintendo, like he's done amazing things. It's awesome. He is fantastic.
Cool. All right. Well, listeners, we want to hear who is your precious baby that you don't want to find out has done terrible things and completely ruin your opinion of them. You can share those thoughts and more about this DLC, where Termite will tell you right now.
If you want to picture Kojima as your little BB and your little orange like tank carrying you around because he's perfect and flawless and has made wonderful games, you can tell us all about it at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website where we have links to all of our social media outlets. Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Twitter, as well as our Discord server is there. So you can jump in and have a live chat discussion with us or our community members. We're pretty responsive on that platform. So if you jump in and want to start a conversation, it's likely that we'll chime in probably within an hour, if that, depending on our days. And so please go do that. If you are listening to us by way of, say, YouTube or some strange place, and you want to know where else we are on our podcast platforms, we have links to Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts, all at 80bitpodsmash.com. So go check us out, subscribe, like, give us a review, tell us how you think about this show, what you think about this show, and how you feel when we talk. Let us know.
Huzzah. Oh, also let us know if you already can shatter our illusions on some of these people. If you've got dirt on these guys and are like, whoa, but you're forgetting that one time that such and such did such and such, then by all means, let us know. We'll hear that out, and we'll probably furiously Google. Anyways, all right. So let's talk about some people that did get caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Let's talk about people who did get caught red-handed or do have a long history of documented abuses or have otherwise been those black marks, those stains on the industry, those quintessential, this is everything wrong with this industry and this culture, this subculture of video gaming. Let's talk about them in the light of day. But first, before we do all of that, I did jot down several disclaimers here because I think they are fair to go ahead and say in an episode like this. So first of all, we want to make this simple disclaimer. We labeled this topic morally gray game developers for a reason, because ultimately we're all human, we're all complex, and good and bad as far as human behavior goes is fairly relative. We're not here to judge, and so we'll try to avoid doing so. And we are not the sole arbiters of what is right and wrong, right? We have certain perspectives and certain opinions on those things, but we are also subject to our own biases, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know a lot of these folks, but people are still accountable for their actions in a public space, right? So even though we don't know them personally, we may not know. They may have all kinds of motivations for acting or being the way they are. Anybody whose name comes up in this episode, we can only evaluate them based on their public actions since we don't know them personally. So that's kind of what our focus is going to be. And we also are aware of the effect of media bias on these stories. No one can know all the facts and circumstances, so we can only form opinions based on what we know. And the media has a huge role in that and will ultimately have a very large influence over what we know and therefore what we think. So we're kind of admitting that on the front end to just be like, we only can go off of what we have, though, right? So people, if any of these people want to defend themselves against what they feel is unfair treatment by the media, they have every right to do so.
And they can do so on our show. I would interview any of them tomorrow.
For sure.
Like, let's go.
Yeah.
I would love that.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, then, if you don't mind me getting a little pulling back from video games and the industry for just a second and just briefly talk philosophy here for a second, I wanted to highlight a couple things because the words are going to come up a couple times. And ultimately, I want to highlight the differences and then simultaneously say we're probably not going to focus too much on the differences. We may even use these two words interchangeably, but I want to talk first about what is the difference between morality and ethics. And then furthermore, we'll answer the question, as individuals, do we have a responsibility to be moral and or ethical? And more importantly, for this conversation, do businesses, and by extrapolation, video game developers, have an obligation to uphold, quote unquote, virtuous behavior? Go.
All right. You ready? Here we go.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I did some cursory research, which I think anyone should be able to do. Ethics are more or less rules imposed like externally. And by rules, I mean like rules of wrong and right. What's wrong and what's right imposed externally. And those can come from things
like guidelines, right? Yeah. They're like,
it's outside of an individual. It's kind of communally established.
Agreed upon.
Agreed upon. It can be in government through our laws. It can be in spirituality through religion and practices such as those things. So that's kind of your ethics. External.
And they mostly deal with like codes of conduct, right? How should we interact with one another is more the realm of ethics, whereas morality is a lot broader. It could be like, how are you supposed to interact with yourself? How are you supposed to view your right and your wrongdoing and blah, 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 blah. It's more of like an attempt to create sort of an internal worldview as opposed to ethics, which are like, no, ethics is almost more practical. I think moral is more like head in the clouds. Not always, but it's more in dealing with that. Whereas ethics, I think, is a bit more like what is like morality applied almost. I think ethics, but then also communally agreed upon, right? So we can all sort of say, the lowest common denominator. This is like acceptable behavior. Makes sense? I think.
Yes.
I think that's fair. That's good. That's good distinction there. I like your explanation on that. So therefore. Given that, we're probably going to speak, like everything we talk about is probably going to be more in the realm of ethics, but I think that we'll also be able to, we'll probably use the word moral and just know that, we understand the distinction between the two and yet we're not going to be pedantic about it. But I do think it was important to kind of establish that on the get-go. So therefore, do you think that as individuals, we have a responsibility to engage with one another or in general with the world? Do you think we have a responsibility to be moral and ethical people, and do businesses by extrapolation have that obligation as well?
This is where like things get complicated because morals are individual, right? So my morals might brush up against your ethics if we are two different religious spectrums. Like things that I would affirm and agree with that are okay and moral, your ethics would dictate otherwise. And so and this is just totally hypothetical, but like if a person's morality is based on their ethics and my ethics and my morality are different, if our ethics are different, our morality could be different. And then there could be friction in the middle. And so when it comes to like businesses, places of business, like they need to be the most abstract, enabling of all different types and kind of have like the loosest ethics imposed on their employees to allow like their employees to exercise their own morals, but also to protect themselves and their employees from each other. And so this is where it all gets super murky and gray.
Right.
There's no clear cut right wrong. And yes, it's the responsibility of morals
Right.
of your individuality and the ethics of the business together. And like that has to be
Right.
shaped together and needs to be talked about and worked through.
And I think that's ultimately what I was trying to get at. Is it's not the question isn't so much like, do you have a responsibility to make sure that your ethical behavior or your morality lines exactly up with everybody around you? No, the question is like, based on your own internal compass or your company, right? If you're the leader of a company, you and the other leaders should you agree upon whatever that compass is, and then like do your best to try to be good based on like your interpretation of it. I think that you're right. I think everyone does. I think capitalism complicates things, right? Because
I was
capitalism,
just thank you for bringing that word into this
right.
conversation. Capitalism
we talked about it in our capitalism
Yes.
episode, right? That we did for Christmas. That's your Christmas gift, is a very, very tedious conversation on capitalism. But in that conversation, we talked about how like the only real morality in capitalism is profits at all costs. Now, granted, that means they have to sort of, in order to make profits, they have to act somewhat ethically, right, towards their employees, or else they're not going to have any employees, and towards their consumers, or they're not going to have any consumers. But, with capitalism, it's kind of like get away with as much, do the bare minimum of ethical behavior, and then get away with whatever else you can, moral or not, in order to make the most profit you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. Capitalism is kind of opposed to morals when it comes to like usually they're at odds with each other, and so like you said, there's a very specific
I would disagree.
way.
I just think that there's like for capitalism, there's a goal above, right, that supersedes. It's like
Right.
first profit, then ethics, right?
Exactly.
But
that's what I mean.
as I put it, I was having a conversation with my wife. I'm listening, by the way, partially this episode, or at least this question on this episode, is inspired by a very great book that actually should have been my favorite thing as well. It's called How to Be Perfect without the T, and it's by Michael Shore, the guy who wrote The Good Place. So it's partially inspired by that, but I was having a conversation about that with my wife and talking about like, well, what can we know what goodness is, right? I use the example of money in that regards. I said there are certain circumstances where money can be a good thing, right? Like just the idea of currency, right? Like it can generate wealth, it can enable people who may not have certain skills to use their skills to still get things in the world. Like money, the idea of currency and commerce has very many ways created the world we live in. But it can also be a really bad thing when it like takes things away from people, right? When the pursuit of it can, enable so much bad behavior. I think capitalism is kind of in that same boat where it's like there are circumstances in which the pursuit of profits, so to speak, actually does like, fuel innovation and stuff like that. But so often we see in this stage of it, at least, it's just like get away with everything you possibly can. And when you are caught in immoral and unethical behavior, like, just try to deflect and ignore or whatever as much as you can until it becomes
I think you had brought up a
unbearable.
really good point. Like businesses in America, like corporate America, we actually have built into their financial budgets, into their plans,
I
like
hate it.
the
Man.
litigation expense to be caught. Like it's like we are going to have our hands caught in the cookie jar, and it's something bad is going to happen, and we have budgeted money for that so that we can
They
deal
see
with it.
it
no
difference as the expense they need to pay for,
employees,
insure, right, employees,
healthcare,
labor, or right,
retirement,
or even like
benefits.
They see it as, or even supplies, right, like
right,
like the resources they need to, like it's a line item. That's why we should totally do it based off of a percentage of profits, right? If it's a flat fee, then yeah, they can do that. If it's a percentage of your profits for the year, suddenly it hurts a lot more. That should be the punishment.
Yeah,
for
should be
certain crimes, right? Certain criminal behavior, whatever.
Yeah.
It's all just a racket.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we can move on. So we've established, I think, that we can all somewhat, maybe not all of us, if you want to disagree, we can talk about it in the places aforementioned. But I think we more or less most people would agree. I think that individuals and by extension corporations, because corporations are just a conglomerate of individuals, right, have some responsibility to act ethically and or morally. So with that said, our next question then is, oh wait, real quick, sorry, one more statement of fact: being a bad person does not automatically make you less talented. So this is kind of to segue us into the next question here, that like just because you're bad, just because you may be doing things that most people would agree are morally bad or unethical, it doesn't make you less talented. So there are circumstances where morality and talent are not mutually exclusive, right? And it's quite frequent for people, especially in the entertainment industry or in the art community, to be brilliant creators but reprehensible humans. And so I think of some examples, painful examples in my life, like Woody Allen, Bill Cosby. Grew up watching The Cosby Show, absolutely loved it. Still think the dude is a terrible, terrible human being, but his comedy is good. And then Joss Whedon is a very recent example. Dude turned out, I grew, once again, like teenage years, like young adulthood, Buffy, Firefly, the first Avengers movie, legendary, and those are still good things. Those are still like well done, well written pieces of entertainment. And yet Joss Whedon turned out to be an abusive a-hole, and he needs to be rightly condemned for it and rightly blackballed from the industry for the rest of his life. So, you have to hold those two things up in your head as like, okay, you can have someone who is bad and should be stopped from doing bad things by being canceled or blackballed or whatever, but also that doesn't mean you're a bad person if you enjoyed what they made. So I kind of wanted to kind of make that sort of what I call it statement of fact kind of disclaimer before we roll into our next question, which is what are some examples of game developers who turned out to be bad people? And what are examples of great games made by those bad people? And did you find out they were bad people in hindsight or before those things? So
I'll take it even a step further. If you're thinking about like a book or a piece of art, something that you can take in, and of course a video game, think about like their bad behavior as a context to what they're creating and see if that kind of influences or changes their like your perception of the work based on their context. I hope that made sense. But like if somebody hates women, like is just a misogynistic like individual who just really belittles women, and you see like this painting that they have done, and you're like, oh, through that lens, like I get this out of that painting, out of the response, or like out of this work of art, the things that this person has written or said, like this makes more sense while you're consuming. So like the act of consuming the art doesn't enable or allow that behavior to persist. It's still there and you can still partake of it.
Absolutely.
So you can still watch Firefly and like know what Joss Whedon has done.
I'm still going to watch Firefly, and I'm going
and like that's not making you what
I'm going
to
cringe every time. Oh, absolutely.
Right.
I'm going to cringe though every time that the main character calls the main female character a not very kind word.
Right.
To call someone of her profession, like it's going to be that much more cringeworthy. Whereas in the past, it was kind of like, oh, but Joss Whedon, and that was the thing about Joss Whedon that sucked, is he always presented himself as a feminist, and people always lauded him as such. And now in hindsight, it's like, yeah, but you like verbally abused your female actresses on set. Like that's not feminism, bro. Anyways, I think that it is, well, and you bring up a good point. There is also this aspect of, culturally speaking, we want our artists to be tortured individuals, to have their dark sides, right? Like that everybody always says like those are the people that make the best art, that make the best entertainment. And so it's but then what's too far, right? And maybe we shouldn't be like holding those people up as like the greatest artors, but again, you wouldn't. One of the things that makes Hideo Kojima such a great artist is that he has this twisted, effed up like artistic vision, and it's like, but that's got to come from somewhere. But at the same time, we need it. So it's like we want our artists to be monsters, but we want that monstrous behavior to be restrained. And I think that is good for us as a society to reckon with and figure that out. Like, how can we allow people to go to those deep, dark places without allowing those deep, dark places to affect them? Or more importantly, how do we allow people to go to those deep, dark places that have not been to those deep dark places already in their lives, right? Like if you're, so I don't know. I think there's definitely a sort of a societal aspect of that balancing act that we have to figure out, because anyways, so let's talk about let's jump into examples. The example that inspired this episode, especially considering that their new game's about to come out, is Gearbox's Randy Pitchford, who is in part responsible for the Borderlands franchise. Oh gosh, do we even need to list the litany of abuses this guy is responsible for? He drove the Claptrap actor away, who was like one of the pillars of their company, because he was like verbally and physically abusive towards him in public. Like the dude like grabbed him by the shoulders at like E3 or something, and shook him, and it's like again, physically shook him. You don't do that to an employee, especially in a public place, but like people are witnesses of people like him doing this, like yelling at him and like shaking him. It's like ridiculous. That, and then there was the whole debacle with the dude who was suing them, Wade Callender, the lawyer who was suing them over some alleged child images. I'll try to be discreet here, but
family friendly.
some
Yeah.
some
Child explicit
non-family
content.
friendly. Yeah, exactly. Some exploitative content. It's like, and then that was kind of like, that was alleged, but it was still just like it's this litany, like story after story of people coming out being like, this dude's just a complete monster to work with. And it's like, but he makes a great game franchise. So it's hard to then say, like, do you boycott them? Do you punish all the other developers as well because of this one dude who runs the show?
That's
don't know.
a later question in this discussion.
That is a later question, exactly. So, but you have a bunch of great examples of
yeah.
both companies and people. So hit me.
Yes.
But don't hit me,
order of which I will say will not match the notes, but that's fine. So Kurt Schilling, we're talking about individuals. Kurt Schilling is a baseball player who was like a famous pitcher with like a bloody ankle for a team. I don't know. They throw balls and they run around bases. It's some sport called baseball. I don't really follow. But Kurt Schilling, like famous baseball player, decided, I want to stand up a studio. And so I'm going to get into the video game industry. And he stood up this whole studio. This is all very well documented and written wonderfully by Jason Schreier in the book Press Reset. So it's my plug to go read all of that detail. But the game Kingdoms of Amalor, which recently got a remaster and was for free on PlayStation Plus, you have platinumed it.
It's a solidly like C+ game, not bad game, not a great game, but not a bad game. But like the dude who's responsible for it was like a complete, a terrible human. Yep.
And he was totally disconnected from like the knowledge of people. Like people were just cogs in a machine to him. And he stood up entire studios in different locations, and they got shut down. People relocated their entire families and lives to only have their lives ripped out from under them and be way upside down in debt because of this man's decision. So he is just a monster. I also threw in Dan and Sam Houser, that they are the founders of Rockstar. Part of the founders of Rockstar, who made Red Dead Redemption 2, and because of their crunch culture, they're notorious for, again, Jason Schreier has a giant expose when he was writing for Kotaku at the time. You can go find it, and he writes extensively about they would just make creative decisions on a whim because they thought something was wrong that would result in crazy amounts of hours of crunch because they were ridiculously impactful on the development team, and they were disconnected from that.
J. Allen Brack out there really quick too.
Yeah,
sorry, before you get in that, just because it's kind of similar, is BioWare. Did you include BioWare in there? No, I don't see it. But BioWare and the whole Anthem debacle. I'm blanking on the guys. I think I want to say like Casey Hudson was one of them, but also there's another one. But the whole idea, the creative team that was basically in charge of Anthem, their whole like taking forever to actually come up with the concept while their developers are sitting there like, we've got deadlines and we need to actually like be putting a product. We literally don't have a game. We don't have a game. We can't work on a game. And these dudes just like never brought it together, but like then had the the BioWare magic. It'll come together. We always do. BioWare magic.
Yeah,
they kept pushing
put your head in
line.
the sand. It'll come together. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They kept pushing this line. It's like, it's not so much that they couldn't come up with a creative vision. But it's the fact that they handled that so irresponsibly, right? Like, it's like, if you don't have a creative vision and you don't know what you're doing and you have to make a game, make a different game, figure it out. And instead of just like pushing this thing onto your employees and your company, right? EA suffered as a result too. And the whole like fabricated trailer right before E3, like all that's just like, it's so scummy. It's so ridiculous. It's so unethical to put your company and your publisher through that, and your fans, right? And then of course you're the consumers, like that whole thing, the whole BioWare's leadership during Anthem, and arguably the leadership that's still running the company, all those guys, like carry on. J. Allen Brack,
J. Allen Brack,
Bobby Kotick. Ooh, yeah.
Bobby Kotick, of course, is obvious. I'm not even going to go into
right.
Bobby Kotick.
This is going to be Activision, right? Yeah, Activision, Blizzard. Like, this is why this topic kept getting more and more. We kept putting this topic off because it kept getting more relevant, not because it kept getting less relevant.
Right.
We had this topic way back before Borderlands 3 came out, back in the pre-pandemic times. We had this topic sitting on our list, and it's only gotten more relevant as time's gone on. But yeah, the whole freaking not just the sexual abuse thing, but even before that, Blitzchung, J. Allen Brack's whole like, we're sorry for this thing that we did wrong, but we won't say what it was, and we won't say why it's wrong. And look, I'm wearing an LGBTQ pin because I'm so supportive of people. Like, nah, dude, you're literally partaking in like government censorship for another country is what you're taking part in, and you're sitting there being like, but look, LGBTQ people. Like,
yeah,
no,
that's just posturing, like this and dude virtue signaling, and Yeah.
And he was part of
All
that panel too. That when that woman like asked why,
Yeah, that's what I was just about to bring up. Yep.
Scantily. Yep. Okay, go. It's your story then. You do it.
Yes. So there's a YouTube video about this. You can find it. It was back in like 2010, and there was a woman in the.
I think it was before he was the president. It was back when he was.
He was
still
when he
just
was
like
he was the
World of
WoW
Warcraft team. He was like a
executive producer of World of Warcraft,
Right,
and the woman had spoken. This is a giant stage, like E3. I think it was BlizzCon.
It was BlizzCon.
And
yep.
so there's thousands of people around, and she has the mic. And her question is, why do all of the female characters in World of Warcraft look like they stepped out of a Victoria's Secret catalog? Let's like be more realistic, representative, and like respectful to women. And his response was, oh, then what catalog would you like us to pull from? And like people cheered and laughed, and like it was ridiculous. It was so
painful,
cringe
man.
and so bad and so awful. That dude should have been pulled off the stage and fired on the spot immediately, because that is unacceptable.
Right. No,
absolutely unacceptable.
But they were being cheered, right? It's like when you're surrounded by people who are just gonna like. And that's the problem, is the freaking culture enables this. Not just that, it produces these people, man. We'll get to all that.
Yep. Yep. And so continuing on, Ubisoft is definitely not innocent at all. Chief Creative Officer Sergei Haskowet, Managing Director of Ubisoft's Canadian studios, Yannis Malat, and Global Head of HR, Cecile Cornett, all left the company in July 2020. They resigned after allegations of sexual misconduct and toxic working conditions. So rife with that going on over in Ubisoft. They're not out of the woods. There's lots of stuff going on right now.
You see, when you're talking about like Bobby Kotick and these executives at Ubisoft, in my mind, I'm like, hey, Termite, the answer though was like people who make good games.
Oh, so, right. I'm
just kidding.
There's
plenty
Ubisoft,
of good.
But...
No. Okay, I'll say I play the South Park games, the Fractured Butthole.
And Obsidian was involved in making the Fractured Butthole. So there's that. That's now Microsoft Studio. So how about that?
Ooh. I don't want to have to. Go ahead. And then your last example is another good one. Don't think EA is off the hook, folks.
Oh yeah, EA is, of course, was voted in like 2012 as being the worst company in America, and during that time, John Ricciello was the CEO, and I probably butchered his name, but it's fine. He resigned in 2013 after that being voted worst company in America. He was the head of guiding EA down the path of like predatory microtransactions, business practices that are awful, and just like all of the things you would running franchises into the ground, just producing things year after year after year with very little iteration, very little innovation, and stifling creativity and all of those things, but also just like infuriating the video game industry and ruffling up the feathers of the United States government as we're talking about gambling problems with children and all of that stuff, all of EA. There's so many notorious like examples out there. Just Google those. And BioWare and Anthem was part of that. I want
to throw another one out there that's not, they're not video game makers, but they're still part of the video game industry. And I'll also throw GameStop out there. That company is just like, just go to the GameStop subreddit. Yeah, no, I actually just saw that, which is what inspired me. I was looking at it. Yeah, Reggie Fils is told why he left. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep, that's it.
Yep.
Why did he leave?
He left the board. He left the board because he asked them in a board meeting how they plan to turn the company around, and no one would tell him what their plan was. So the dude who was hired to help turn the company around got in a meeting and said, "Okay, guys, how are we going to turn the company around?" And they said, "No, we don't know." So he's like, "Nah, I'm out." But I mean, even beyond that aspect of it, the company just like has a history of just rampant employee abuses and manipulations and exploitation. Just go to the GameStop subreddit and go in with Bourbon or something. Yeah, just to read how heartbreaking these stories of how these employees are treated. It's awful. So cool. All right.
Oh, Reggie, he's a good one.
All right, we got time. I know. Please, Reggie. No skeletons, bro. All right. We're gonna have to probably cut some of these questions. So I'm going to go to this question because I think it's probably the most important of the ones we have. How do you think consumers should ethically handle these circumstances, especially when it's a game they love, right? So we talked about a lot of these companies like are, you might love or hate Activision or EA, but like we still talked about freaking, Gearbox and Red Dead Redemption, Rockstar, like some of the most popular games and game developers out there. So how do you think that it's up to, like, how should the consumer respond? How do you personally navigate these circumstances? And do you believe that there are baseline things that ethical consumers should do in response? Meaning that, like, okay, you may not go this far personally, but what do you think is sort of the baseline? Like, what should the baseline be of what you do?
It's a lot. It's basically like, how do we navigate these waters? What do we do as consumers, you and I, like the game buyers, game players? We hear, company X has done this. What is our response?
Yeah,
How
and I
should
think
we handle it?
your first
Mhm.
answer there is exactly like what I was trying to get at with this question is boycotts aren't always the answer, right?
Yes, exactly.
Like they are a option. If you feel led to boycott, by all means, boycott. But don't like look down on others who may not be boycotting, right? So I, for one, am still pretty much boycotting Blizzard and don't see an end in sight in that. But I also have publicly said on this podcast, if you're not boycotting Blizzard, I don't look down on you for that. I simply say, like, I simply hope that you find another way to try to make a difference and a
Yep.
change, right? So, anyways, so what are some of those other things though? What is the baseline? Like, what should everybody sort of like
This
if you consider yourself an ethical consumer, what should you do? What is that indicator that you are ethical?
There's no like right answer to this, but I will say like this exact question during the Blizzard discussion when it was all in it coming to a head and it was all in its fervor was what led me to a recommendation from a coworker. Shout out to you. Finally going to watch The Good Place. Like my wife had wanted to
Mhm.
watch it for years, and I was like, "Nah, I don't want to start a new show. I don't want to start a new show." And then I was talking amongst gamers about my response to Blizzard and how we're handling it, and one person chimed in and said, "Hey, you should watch The Good Place." And sure enough, there is one episode in the Good Place. It's way later in its run where they talk about the ethical system of what determines whether you get to the good place or the bad place when you die, and how that scoring system doesn't make sense because a consumer buying an apple who just wants to feed their family, therefore morally correct, is ending up with negative points because of the implications of how that apple got to the
Yep,
store. That would be
exactly.
the
Yep,
grocery
because you're
store that handled
supporting
it,
blah blah
the
blah blah. Yep,
growers, the distribution, the farmers' exploitation, man labor exploitation,
unintended
malpractice,
consequences. Yep.
unintended consequences, right? Just from buying an apple with good intent. And that's where like it shows us how the game is rigged and all of it as far the game of like what's moral, right. If we were to really exercise our moral capacity for like the things that China's doing, and we want to raise awareness of like extremely horrible slave labor and child exploitation and like organ harvesting and all these things. We shouldn't buy anything from China, right? Yeah. Okay, well, how about the monitors I'm looking into right now, the cell phone I
Right.
use every day, the things I do
Yep.
to my job that
That you
are my
need. Yeah.
livelihood that I have to
Yeah.
have, like
To sacrifice
society.
those things. Exactly. Yep.
You couldn't. You would have to be Amish and live in a field with no technology in order to properly run that out to the ground, like
And
to
even
that
then, you'd
extreme.
probably be doing something. Exactly. That's the point. Is it is like you said, it's rigged. If you're scoring that way, it's rigged, right?
Right. So that's how you not approach it. So here's what we do approach. Like, right, there's no right
Right.
answer. So it has to be a scale and it has to be personal and it has to be based on I think the best thing you can do that actually is kind of one objective answer to all of this is to be informed. If you really care, if you really do care, and you don't have
That was
to.
going to be that was going to totally be my answer, right? It's just sort of like at the very least you should look into it. At the very or at the
Right.
very least you should contemplate it and consider like what are ways in which I do these kinds of things in my life, right? Like how can I avoid being this person or how can I avoid being like this company, right? Because that's the best way to make a difference is to learn from the mistakes of others. And then also, of course, I think that speaking out against it, even just by saying like, it doesn't have to be on Facebook. It doesn't have to be public. It's just to be in conversations with people. If the companies are brought up, be like, yeah, they did this terrible thing and they're terrible, right? Like, and people, well, you're still buying their games. Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily reflect poorly on me. I don't let that reflect poorly on me because it's still made by people who are good people just trying to make a living. And I'm not going to punish them for that at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, like, we're not supposed to do everything perfectly. Like, we're not supposed to, we may do things that we feel guilty of. And you should allow that to be what it is and just try to do your best, right? And try to find other ways in which to support, in the case of like Blizzard, women who are sexually harassed, right? And more importantly, like, don't do that yourself, right? Like, identify ways and areas in your life in which maybe you don't treat women the best, or maybe you have predisposed biases against them, because nobody wants that to happen to them. So there's this idea called Ubuntu in the book that I love, and unfortunately, of course, freaking tech capitalists turned it into some
It's a Linux flavor.
silly name for an operating system. Yeah, right. But the actual word is a philosophy that comes out of South Africa. And the basic idea is like, you only exist because of humanity, human civilization, right? Like, not only do you literally only exist because of at least two people, But you also but you also owe your existence to all the people who came before. And arguably, the more comfortable your life, the more you owe it to humanity as a whole, as one single community, basically. And then, but it's not just the people that came before you, it's the people now, right? Like, none of the comforts or things that you have in your life you get because of your own pluck and ingenuity. Like you said, everything from the grocery store that stocks the food and all the workers that go into just giving you food, the people who work tirelessly to produce the energy that you use to warm your home to keep it safe and comfortable for you to sleep, the person who made your bed, the person who made all the things that you love and that you own. And in the same way, humanity relies on you and your contribution. So if we treated everybody as if we owed our existence to them, and everybody treated everybody else like they owed their existence to them, then we might have a better, kinder, more generous, and virtuous world, as opposed to everybody just trying to exploit each other. And the best way I heard it summed up was in a quote, instead of sort of in contrast to Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, the Ubuntuists would say, I am because we are, meaning that only because all of humanity is the only sole reason why I exist. And I think it's a beautiful philosophy, and I wish more people would know about it. I didn't even know about it. I had to hear about it from, a book that just came out, like, as opposed to, this has been around, like Nelson Mandela was a believer in Ubuntu. And yeah, I'd never heard of it. Never, not in a history class, not in a philosophy class, nothing. It's like, come on.
It is
this
wonderful
is one of the best
and
philosophies
beautiful.
out there.
Bask in it.
Yeah.
Yes. Now that you know.
Sure.
And consequences of just being informed, right? So exactly, having a mindset of community. So being informed does a couple of things for everyone, and that's why I want to start, like, our response should just be informed. One is when you are having a casual water cooler conversation with coworkers at work, and you're talking about the malpractice of a certain company, like, that spurs those people that are around you at work are the future leaders of that company. So when you're telling them that this is bad and it is affecting people negatively and leading to females committing suicide, you're injecting a thought that, like, oh, hey, maybe this is a bad thing. Because you were informed about one company's bad practices, you've now incepted that idea to not do that thing around your coworkers. And that's just creates, like, an air around you. And feedback, while it seems inconsequential and you don't have any actions, it didn't cost you anything, but it could cost you something if you were saying something more controversial, like, hey, I don't think our company treats women correctly, or I don't think our company handles religion in the workplace. And now all of a sudden you're in that world of, like, it is kind of costing you a little bit of social currency because you're speaking out against something in your own world, in your own spheres of influence, that you were inspired by someone else's bad stuff. So that's like,
but think about this, like, there's this idea that, like, it may seem silly, but, like, keep in mind that, like, if people like you, they aren't going to want to let you down. They're not going to want to disappoint you, right?
Yeah.
So if your boss really likes you and you say something like about how you in general think it's bad for this kind of thing to happen. In general, I think it's bad for people to exploit their customers. If they have some inkling or idea of them, within their own company and within their own customers, that they're exploiting their customers, they may think, oh man, like, we are doing that, and I don't like that. And if Dan found out, he'd be super disappointed, and that makes, like, that might make them change their behavior. Maybe it doesn't, but it has a chance of making a difference, right? So it's like, the more influence you have in regards to, like, again, it may sound silly, but being liked or being popular, like, and I'm not saying that you have to be, like, the most popular person at your workplace to make a difference, but there are probably people, your coworkers, that like you. Hopefully, I really hope so. If you don't, then, like, please find a new job or find new friends, because, like, and we'll be your friends. We'll like you. Like, we'll hang out. Like, if you're listening to our show, you're automatically someone that we're probably gonna like. So, like. And that's the point, is, like, our spheres of influence, like, find your people, and then, like, you're going to have a positive effect on those people if you strive to be good and strive to learn more about what is good, and more importantly, what is bad, and the bad things that people are doing and happening. So I think that's good. That kind of really answers a lot of these last few questions. So I think that we can probably wrap up there.
But I have one more thought.
And,
very relevant thought about being informed.
Tell us how we can be better.
It's fine. The other, because I had two thoughts about being informed. I laid the first one out. That was spheres of influence and like that. The second point is, when you are informed and you know what's going on out there, you know how to make a difference in the biggest way. So, like, a blanket boycott of saying, I'm not going to play these games, could be inconsequential and not actually amount to any change. Whereas learning about the ABK Workers Alliance stood up
Yeah.
by Gonzalez of someone who used to work for Blizzard. Maybe she's still
And give
there. I'm
them
not
money.
sure.
Give them
Like
money. Yeah.
you can go and donate directly to that movement, which is pushing for
They're
unionization
people who are
amongst
trying to actually improve the workplace
right.
conditions.
And
Yep,
so
for
that
people
is an
of all
avenue
kinds.
with
Yep.
which you could give money to that is infinitely more impactful by just donating $25 to that than it would be to not spend 50 on the next Blizzard game. So if you
Absolutely,
weigh
yeah.
the two
Give
actions,
more, sure. And
yeah,
if you want to do both, that's even better, right?
right,
Don't
yeah,
buy $50 and instead give that $50 to the ABK Workers Alliance. Like if that's how you can do more good. Yeah, there's this idea that I recently came across called so it was in a podcast of stuff you should know on empathy, the idea of empathy. And there's two kinds of empathy. There's effective empathy and oh gosh, what do they call it? Intellectual empathy or something like cognitive. That's what it was, cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy we may recognize more as sympathy, right? The idea of like, oh, I feel like I can understand how you would feel bad in that circumstance. So like, but you're not actually feeling it, whereas effective empathy, you're feeling it. But they actually made a really good argument as to why cognitive empathy or sympathy is actually better than effective empathy. And the reason is because they used the Sandy Hook shooting as an example. And they talked about how like after the Sandy Hook shooting, that school, Sandy Hook, there was a whole like campaign to send them like stuffed animals or something. And they got like inundated with stuffed animals because people felt bad and wanted to do something for the school and for the kids. And so they sent these stuffed animals and they said, stop sending us stuffed animals. Please donate to all these other organizations that could use these stuffed animals. And people got mad that they rejected their stuffed animals.
yeah,
Because effective empathy often drives us to, I'm feeling bad. I'm having an emotional response to this thing that happened to you. So I'm going to do what I need to make myself stop feeling bad. As opposed to
right.
cognitive empathy, you're actually thinking about it and being like, okay, how do I actually make the most difference? Because I do like, this is terrible and I can totally understand how they would feel. And I don't ever want to feel that way. So I'm going to make sure that nobody else feels that way and think through the best way to do that. And I think that's what you're getting at is like, if you're actually empathetic towards the women who suffered under Blizzard, then just knee jerk not buying the games just makes more women at Blizzard suffer, as opposed to thinking through, okay, what is the most impact I can make, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
And
and
that
that's
is
not a
the option
justification to just
B.
buy games, but right. So
Yeah, exactly. That's you should think through that, right? But yeah,
exactly.
sub point to my second thought here is being informed. When I follow all of these game developers on Twitter, the folks that are actively also against the bad practices that are happening, but yet work for those companies, you can see their daily lives and their families and the things they're trying to do. That kind of reduces your desire to just boycott them because you're hurting them.
Yeah.
And you really wouldn't have that if you weren't informed. And I don't think those things are like virtue signaling or posturing. They're just like you follow these people all the time who automatically work for these game developers. And then suddenly something comes up in the news about this game developer. And then like you see their response, but you have the context of whatever voyeurism relationship you have through Twitter, because I don't know these people, but like you can see their lives play out. It gives you, it's being informed, right? It's just establishing the context amongst the gaming industry and all the developers, the people with their hands on the keyboards, the artistic directors, the creative minds behind the products you love are being hurt by your boycott when the companies up higher up, the C level, which are completely disconnected from the creative moves other than just barking orders. Anyway, all of that to say is that when you're informed, you can make more intelligent decisions instead of just like reacting emotionally. And
Sure.
you talk about like how the community acts when you buy a game from a company that is doing horrible things. Like if you buy Call of Duty and knowing that Activision's going through this, no one has a right to criticize you or judge you for that. Like feel completely enabled and okay to go buy a Blizzard game or a Call of Duty game or a Ubisoft game. Like do that. If that's what you want and you want to play and experience their art, you are supporting the developers whose hands are on the keyboard I just mentioned.
Right.
But also be informed and look at what you can do to make an impact elsewhere. And so
For
as
sure.
a community,
I would
we
also
should
not be heartbroken if Blizzard were to be dissolved and all those people were to lose their jobs. That would suck. I'm pretty sure they would land on their feet. I'm pretty sure this is not the only job out there. Like and then there would be a ton of investors freed up to then invest in new companies and startups that may kind of result from these creatives all now being in control of their destinies. So I'm no believer in this idea that like, oh, but we need to save the corporations because of all the people who lose their jobs. It's like throw a wrench in it all. Bring the chaos, because
Eat the rich,
with
right?
the chaos comes the justice, and then with the chaos comes the opportunity for people to, you might lose your job, but you're also now freed up to pursue not only a better job, or maybe start your own and be in control of making.
And
the
we're
games
seeing
that
a lot
you
of
wanna
that.
make.
I mean, we just talked about the
Exactly.
Ubisoft folks who stepped down, like, because they were. What are they going to do? Who knows? But people
Right.
got to fill
Yeah,
those
no.
roles. So are better people going to roll up? I mean,
Exactly.
look at
right. And
Microsoft
I'm
buying
just saying
Activision.
that, like, we don't need this corporate, like, apologetic, like, mindset either. So again, if you do feel led to boycott, also don't feel guilty for boycotting, right? Like, I think
Right.
that is a
Yeah, go
valid
for it.
and legitimate,
Mhm.
logical response. It's not the only one. I would encourage you to do both, right? Boycott and donate to organizations that
Yeah.
are actually trying to make a difference. That is probably the most quote virtuous thing you could possibly do, because you are taking money from the people who are benefiting the most and
Mhm.
exploiting the most, and you are supporting the people who are in the trenches actually doing the good work that need to be supported. So cool. I think that is a good place to end. Listeners, we want to hear your thoughts on all of these very, very difficult things, very, very difficult conversations. We just scratched the surface on what's a huge, huge conversation. And so we want to hear your responses and feedbacks, and maybe we have to, and if we have to do a follow-up, we have to do a follow-up. So we're happy to do that. So based on any feedback. So please, 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 please hit us up. Termite, where can they hit us up?
Give us your hot take and tell us how awful anyone who buys Blizzard games are by going to 80bitpodsmash.com. I'm totally joking. But go to 80bitpodsmash.com and leave comments, thoughts, concerns, ideas, and let's keep this conversation going. I would absolutely love to do another entire episode about this very topic, because we got so much feedback and we have more to talk about. So help us dive away from the tip of the iceberg and into the actual iceberg with this topic. 80bitpodsmash.com,
Diving
Reddit,
into a lot of
Facebook,
icebergs,
Twitter. Let's go. Let's do this.
Was that
Let's
Millennia?
talk.
Was that the Millennia fight for you? Diving into an iceberg?
No. Millennia was just beating my head into a brick wall over and over again until my brain...
Isn't that what diving into an iceberg is? Essentially a brick wall?
When you only see the topic at the top and you want to drill into it and get more into the meat of it, it's like mining. I don't know. Where are we going with this analogy? It's all
I don't know.
apart.
It's all good. Hey, guess what? Next week is not any particularly important week.
What?
It's not 3 days after a date that is, a date that people topically do stuff and stuff. So instead, it's just going to be a regular episode that we may or may not already have a topic for. I don't know. What's happening? Who knows? April 4th is going to be an episode, 237, and it'll be an episode, and we'll talk about stuff. So that's happening next week.
Is it? Maybe?
Or maybe not. I don't know.
Come join us for some who knows what.
Who knows what?
Next week.